Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let's get started and let's just recap from what we have covered yesterday. And then I'll share you the notes yesterday. It escaped my mind and it occurred to me late in the night, but we'll share it today, inshallah. We introduced Angular and other similar technologies, and we introduced what the terminology of single page application and how Angular and other similar technologies are single page applications. And we talked about Angular history, how Angular JS is different from Angular 2 plus, and how Angular is evolved and what is the current version. And we talked about MVC pattern and how Angular JS is MVC pattern versus Angular 2 plus is not, and which is component view pattern. And we'll go more into detail of this one as we proceed in the course. So like yesterday, anytime you feel like my volume is going down, let me know. I'll bring it up, inshallah. And also finally, we briefly covered Angular project and or folder organization, and we'll come back to these topics, I mean, related to Angular stuff, whichever Angular version we are trying to learn now. We'll keep coming back to that so that it becomes clearer and clearer, because all this was theory until yesterday. And once we start getting some practice of it, we'll gain more understanding. And if we come back to these topics, and at that point of time, it will be more clearer and more ingrained in our minds, inshallah. And yesterday we left off at the Angular architecture. So yesterday I decided to hold off on that, and instead of showing you the architecture diagram from the website itself or from the Angular team itself, we'll build the architecture diagram as we go, inshallah. That would be more helpful than me just showing the diagram, and eventually we'll see that diagram too, but we'll build it and then we'll try to relate it with the official diagram, inshallah. So today we'll be covering these, and one of the suggestions from yesterday was to have an agenda or the table of contents that we'll go over, and we'll try to achieve as much as possible. And because our next session would be next week, and we'll have a lot of time on our hands for practice, so I'll try to cover these as soon as possible and as much as possible for you to take home and practice a lot, inshallah. So let's start with scaffolding. Scaffolding is something that IDE or some command generates for us. Let me check some setting. So yesterday we have seen on the StackBlitz website, let me just open that. How, when we say a new Angular app or a React app, how it was generating a project for us. And that is in a way scaffolding. Whatever is generated for us by anything, by the IDE, integrated development environment. Let me just write that down so that if somebody is unable to get my pronunciation, they will be able to see it. So integrated development environment, which is Visual Studio Code in our case, because that is what we will be using. Or right now the StackBlitz website is providing a kind of integrated development environment for various kinds of application that we have, and we have seen Angular and little bit of React yesterday. So Visual Studio Code. So this is what was scaffolded for us by StackBlitz, which is bare minimum to run the application. Now let's see what Visual Studio Code has scaffolded for me yesterday when I generated the app. So I have named the app as app1. It generated a source folder, just like what StackBlitz did for us. but and angular.json, package.json, and what else was there? tsconfig.json. But VS Code, all it's not actually VS Code, but we'll go over what is called as CLI, command line interface. Let me write that down so that command line interface. CLI, or it's referred to as Angular CLI by many, or maybe officially too, Angular CLI, and which is necessary to actually run the Angular application. Anyway, so what did it do is it did not generate the node underscore modules folder. We'll talk about this in a bit, but it generated something called E2E folder, which stands for end-to-end testing. So our end-to-end tests will go under this folder, which so Angular CLI provides more than just bare minimum. So we'll go over those stuff later on, but we'll try to jump on something that you can take away from today and you can practice entire week inshallah. So quickly again, it generated a source folder, and under source folder, there is an app folder where most of our code will go. Maybe 90, more than 90%, 95% of our code will go under this app folder. So it also generated a folder called assets. I believe this the CSS files, the image files, which and those kind of media that our app consumes is supposed to go under the assets folder. And we have something called environment. Basically, it generated two files over here. One is environment.ts and environment.prod.ts. As the name suggests, one is supposed to be used for environment for production release, and other is supposed to be used for any other environments. And most of the time, the test environment, mockup environment, they are a mimic of production environment. But if there are any differences, we can have more files over here. But this is just for theoretical purposes at this point of time. But inshallah, if time permits, we'll see how these work. And rest of the and we need not go over each and every file, but the point is these are all scaffolded for us. That's what is scaffolding. So briefly, I mean, let me also show you or try to show different kind of scaffolding just for gaining an understanding of how different systems work. So now Visual Studio Code as well as Visual Studio, right now I'm operating 2019 version. They are both from Microsoft. And there are various IDEs from different companies. One of them that I have used is called WebStorm. WebStorm also has the facility of writing different kinds of applications, Angular, React, Vue, Ionic, Node.js. They provide the similar scaffolding. I don't know if, I mean, it cannot be the same, but let's have a look at Visual Studio 29 scaffolding. So I opened Visual Studio 2019. I just installed it yesterday, so it's brand new. There are no recent projects over here. I'm trying to create a new project. Inshallah, we'll create Angular project as well as a different project, and maybe ASP.NET MVC project. So they all fall under web application. So I have to select the category first, and I'll leave the name as web application 1 and ask it to create. Basically, it will not create right away, but it will ask me further some questions as to what exactly I want to create. So over here, we have more options. One of them is Angular. So let's just select Angular and then see what gets scaffolded for us. Yeah, it's taking a little while. Meanwhile, there is something else that we could tackle. Yeah, let's go back to our agenda. Maybe it will give me a clue. Okay. Yeah, while it does that, we'll try to scaffold another application in Visual Studio Code, another Angular application. So Visual Studio Code doesn't have something called a new project, or I mean a templates for the project where we can say, give me a web application of type Angular. So Visual Studio Code relies on, uh, yeah, there is a new file, new window, but it's just a new instance of Visual Studio in case of new window, a new file within the same project. So it doesn't have, but what it does have is something called a terminal. We can go to the terminal menu over here, open a new terminal, or there is, when we open Visual Studio, there will be an existing terminal. To have a look at it, we can view the terminal from the view command, from the view menu item. Also, we can create new terminals from the plus icon over here in the terminal window. Anyway, let's switch back to the Visual Studio. I think something got created over here. I'll move this app, the chat on the left side. So we can see it's scaffolded something else for us. I mean, we don't see, at least I don't see right away from this collapsed project view. Where is Angular app? I do see something called app settings.json, but I know for sure that it doesn't belong to Angular at all. So anyway, what is scaffolded for us is our Angular application plus a server application that Angular application can consume. So let's open this client tab. So it's kind of what you say organized in a little different way. So under the solution, Visual Studio has something called solutions, and under the solution we have a project. Under the project, it created a folder structure for Angular under a folder named client app. So we can see E2E was generated and a source folder SRC folder was generated, just like what we have seen on StackBlitz, no, what we have seen in Visual Studio that I have generated yesterday. So we'll generate one more today, but and you can see angular.json and package.json, tsconfig.json, and there is an extra readme file, not extra readme file, but we have there should be a readme file in the Visual Studio generated one, Visual Studio Code generated one too. Readme, yeah. So this is how Visual Studio goes an extra step forward and try to give us something more than just the client app. And that more is a little bit too much for us at this point of time. We'll not go there. Maybe we'll come back to it and try to consume what was provided as something consumable by the Angular app. So I'll just, okay. And let's see another kind of scaffolding. I mean, this is a similar scaffolding, it's just something extra from what Visual Studio Code or the Angular CLI actually, not the Visual Studio Code. It doesn't do anything by itself, but the Angular CLI gave us. Let's try to, instead of creating a new solution, I'll just add to the same solution another kind of project. An MVC project, oops, an MVC project that just to look at how it scaffolds, how the Visual Studio scaffolds. So add to the solution a new project. And by the way, this Visual Studio 2019 is a community edition. If you want to play with that and work with that, you can download it. It's free because it's community edition, not a paid edition. So let's go back and try to scaffold ASP.NET Core web application. It's called web application 2. Let's not worry about renaming that. And this time we'll scaffold a web application with model view controller framework, MVC framework, and just have a look at what MVC framework is and how it looks like. So what, oops, bring the chat back up so that get the messages right away. Okay. So that was code of web application 1, web application 2. The point of interest is it creates something called controller, a home controller. So yesterday we talked about MVC pattern. So if there was a products controller would have actions to get all the products, and products controller would have action to get one product, single product, and it would have also have actions to add, modify, and delete product. So right now it's home controller. It didn't give us a lot of options over here. All it does is like index is kind of what you say by default to get all products, something like that. So instead of referring to home controller, let's create our own controller. So I click and add. So there is both are MVC controller, both follow MVC pattern, but this will create some UI. This will not create any UI. So this is API call. We'll go over what is API later in the course, but right now just for the demonstration. Oh, no, I should have selected actually a different thing. The other one. Let me go back. So I'll add an MVC controller rather than just API controller. So it's named as home controller, but let me name it as product controller. The controller suffix is not a must, it's just a convention. So index is like I said, get all the products. So that's what it says, get, and it leaves everything else like product slash, that's it. And this is product. Okay, so a little bit different convention that it follows. Instead of product /1, it says product controller /details /5. So get me the product details with ID 5. And index is just as the first URL over here, product slash. And we can see something called create. And there is another create. So basically what it means is when get is used and this action is called product controller /create. We'll go over get and post if anybody doesn't have an idea of what that is later in the course, but quickly, get is a get request, post is do something, get is kind of a fetch request, give me something, whereas post is, okay, take this and process it. So when the get is called on the product controller using the create URL or create part in the URL, what it means is give me a view which is a user interface, so that the user can enter some details and use the same create using post. So when the user enters something, that means the user is trying to create a product, and that information is passed as the body of the request using the post request. So create accepts something. That something is of the type some form collection, basically product name, product description, product category, things like that. So that comes in collection, and that collection we can write some code. Right now it's not doing anything, it's just returning something else, but we can connect to the database and add it to the database. So anyway, that is how MVC framework works. So the controller is invoked, the controller is responsible, to give back a view over here and over here. This is also a view, which is just redirecting. I mean, it's indirectly giving a view of index, which is all products, which is this index. So anyway, I mean, this course is not about MVC, so we'll just stop here. MVC, this is how it gets scaffolded. That is what I was trying to show. So this is all scaffolding. By default, this is project level scaffolding. When I right clicked on the controllers folder, and whatever it generated is, I mean, this is all generated code. I haven't typed anything, I haven't put it anything. This is what is called scaffolding. So we'll stop over here. Trying to see different kind of scaffolding and go back to Angular and try to scaffold an Angular app. So in the terminal, you can see we are in a folder called app1 that I have created earlier. The reason why I have created yesterday itself is creation is very easy, but because by default it installs a lot of packages, or quite a few packages, you can see, and these packages are under folder name node.modules, and this is also a convention. It's not specific to Angular. When Angular app is created, this node modules is created with the default packages that CLI provides. Similarly with React, similarly with Node.js application, this module, this folder called node_modules will be created according to their CLI or their scaffolding. So we'll go back one folder down and try to create another app and see how to do it. So that is about, okay, we have just talked about scaffolding. Now we'll go to CLI. CLI kind of, what you say, got introduced. CLI means command line interface, which Angular provides. So what does what is CLI? We have looked at the definition, but the CLI is a bunch of commands. Any CLI is command line interface, as the name suggests. It's a bunch of commands that you can type in the terminal or on the using the command prompt and generate something. So the interface that Angular provides or other frameworks provide is just called command. Interface through the commands is called command line interface. That's all it is. So for Angular, their commands start with ng. So let me actually go back one level down and try to create a new application over there. ng new. Let me name it as app2. So you might have seen some oddity as to how I'm naming it. APP all in small, but T, because a different word is starting, I went for capital T, and WOR small. This is called lower camel case. So for naming of apps, or how Angular interprets is behind the scenes is a little different. So we are supposed to go with the camel case while naming our own folders or files using command line interface, and we'll see what it actually generates in a bit. So let me just close this before hitting enter. Close the folder. Oops. Close the terminal too. I'm sorry. Okay, let's go to the terminal again. View the terminal. Okay, let's start getting a different folder. Let me go back to C users. That is where I want my projects. dir will list what's in there. So I have another project, another folder named project. So I'll over there. Projects. There should be a ng projects. Or I don't know. Most likely you must be knowing when we want to change to a directory, we can do a cd and directory name, or right now I just have two folders over here, ng projects and vs projects. So because nothing else is starting with n, I can just say n star. It will go directly to a project starting with n, because that's the only one. If it is, if there were more projects starting with n, then it would get confused and ask me what exactly I want. Anyway, we are in ng projects. Dir, there is only one. So ng new. So what is the command to create a new app, new Angular app? Ng new, and the name we want the app to have. App 2. Let me see if my -d works with the new. I don't know. I'm just trying for the first time, but we'll look at my -d flag in a bit. So that is the reason I created yesterday. Sometimes it takes. Yeah, it did create. So the first question it is asking me is, do I like to add Angular routing? What it is, we'll look at a bit. Right now, we'll just say no. And later on, we'll say yes and see what it does, what difference it makes. So anyway, the second question is, which style sheet format would you like to use? So as we know, the CSS is for styling HTML. And there are other technologies too that Angular supports: SCSS, Sass, Less, Stylus. I read about Less and Sass a long time back. At this point of time, I have no idea what they are, but I know what CSS is. Let's go with CSS. If anybody else would like to play around while practicing for the week, they can have different styling too. But how it applies styling will, regardless of what style sheet format we will use or we may use, the way to use them is the same. So I'll just stick with the default CSS and hit enter. Now it creates a project for us, and it says in a note, the dry run flag means no changes were made. Basically, it just gave us a structure of what it will do, or kind of intention of what the CLI will do when we run that command without the D flag, -D flag. D flag is for dry run, and dry run flag can be used before you actually execute the command, and that will let us have a look at what will get generated. So this is what will get generated, and we have already seen most of it, or the important parts of it. So let's go ahead and create without the D -D flag or dry run flag. So -D was just a shortcut. I'll just skip this one, just to talk about dry run. So ng new, instead of just D or just one -D, we could have done -- dry run, which means the same. So Angular provides some kind of shortcuts for some of the options. We'll look at those options too, but right now just for your information, instead of just -D, if you don't remember it, you can just have -- is the convention of options. So initially there will be command. Ng is for Angular, new is for interpreted as a new app, and any other options after that will have -. So there are actually lots of options, but right now we'll not overwhelm ourselves with those options, and we'll try to get started, inshallah. So let's use the full form. No, we are not using dry run anyway, so we want an actual app now. So let's create that. Let's say yes to Angular routing, so that we can tackle it right away, and CSS. So the reason why, one other reason why I created app1 yesterday itself is, we have seen the node modules, node_modules folder, where our packages go, or the default packages that Angular creates for us go. And we have seen the package.json, which contains a listing of those files. So right now, when we run the new command, the Angular CLI is trying to install the packages for us right away. We could have used the option of hyphen skip install. It would have skipped the install, but if we wanted to run that app, it wouldn't run because it wouldn't run until those packages are installed. So anyway, we have to install it, so I didn't skip it, and it will take a while. So instead of waiting for us, let's go back to app 1 and get started on the next things. So what is the next thing that okay, we introduced CLI, we talked about CLI, and CLI will keep talking about it to create other stuff too. So we just created an app. What if we want to create a component service? So things like that. We'll keep coming back to that. And let's get started with okay. We took care of point number 3. We can talk about JSON now. So most likely you are familiar with JSON. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation. JSON. Just to keep an eye on. Okay, let me go back to app 1. We don't need app 1 to actually have a look at JSON. So as the name suggests, it says notation to describe objects used for JavaScript. So something along those lines. So that's how I try to keep that in mind. So let me actually somewhere, it doesn't matter where. Let me create a new file over here and name it as so because I intend to use this file just for JSON purposes or just to have JSON objects purposes, I named it as JSON, and it doesn't have to be just JSON. It can be TS or it could have been JS file too. So instead of threading over which one, just let's go for JS. Simply put, JSON objects are two types, or not exactly JSON object, but anything is of two types with respect to data. It's either a scalar value, that is a single value, or a collection of values, which is termed in computer science as an array most of the times, or a collection. But array is most appropriate, I believe. So anyway, for singular value, we are writing objects here. I mean, which are instances of classes. No, I mean, when I say scalar value, even one is a scalar value, but it's not called an object. It's just a scalar or primitive type, which is in JavaScript it's number. In other languages it might be integer. So when I say scalar value, I'm talking about an instance of a class. So if there was a class called product, then instance would be product ID with 1, right? So let me write a class for product using JSON notation. So for singular values or scalar values, the notation is that value will go inside the flower brackets, inside the flower parentheses. So let's try to write the product in object in JSON notation. So ID maybe 1, product name, laptop. Okay, maybe it has a brand. So let me name this as one, just like our app 1. brackets are gone. And in JavaScript and TypeScript and many languages, the statements end in semicolon. So same with the TypeScript with Angular, we can opt. I mean, and that is optional. It's not a must, but it's kind of habit. And also best practices to actually have it rather than not have it. Anyway, so this is about product one. What and product two will have the same properties but different values or property values. So ID might be 2, product name might be desktop, and brand might still be Lenovo or something else. So the key thing is this is the scalar values in JSON notation are enclosed in flower brackets. Or I'm not getting another term for that, but it doesn't matter right now. Let's move forward. And what about multiple products or array of products? So array goes under square bracket. Basically that means, I mean, it's a collection, and right now if nothing is entered in there, it means it's an empty collection. And if something is entered, let me enter this copy and product, copy and paste the entire product. So right now that means this array, the products array has one product inside. If I add one more and then update the ID to 2, product name might still be laptop, but it might be a different company. So right, this our collection has, or our array has 2 products now. So this is all there is to JSON with respect to the, how we represent the objects. And how we represent the property is, this is the syntax used here. I mean, there are other ways to create arrays and objects, and this is one of the way, and this way is called object literal syntax. So we are literally defining the properties and their values right away. We are giving the shape of the data called product right away. So it's called object literal syntax. We are literally defining it right now. So how to define properties is, properties, they go in lower camel case. So basically the first letter, regardless of it is a new word or not, is small, and the other first letters for the other words, they are in capital. So it's called lower camel case. So property names go in lower camel case, and I don't have to define it right away. I can just, I don't have to define it as I did. The other way is enclose them in single quotes or double quotes, right? So this is how we define. This is what is JSON notation. This is how we define objects and arrays in JSON notation. So it's pretty simple. 2 types. One is scalar value, and other is array. They have different, and array they have different. They go under different braces, different kind of brackets, and within array, because they are collection of scalar values, or actually they can be collection of other collections too. So let's quickly write. Without worrying about it, this means it's a it's a collection of collections or array of arrays. So the first element is an array, and the second element is another array within the bigger array. So array could also contain other arrays, but most of the time, we as designers and developers should try to avoid multiple nesting of arrays, so that things are simple. And some cases, I mean, depending on how complex the project is, we might not be able to avoid it, but that's what I try to do at least. So anyway, let's move on and let's save this, and we don't need this file anymore. Or actually, I'll just copy this data from this file and get it in our app.component. So if you look at what Angular has created is for us through its scaffolding is a component or just one component for us to get started to use it. So what did it create? It created for us as part of the component app.component.css, app.component.html, app.component.ts, and app.component.spec.ts. So this is the convention that Angular follows for every component. It creates a CSS file, it creates a HTML file, it creates a TypeScript file, and it creates something called spec.ts, which is a test file for that particular component. So we'll try to get to test if time permits later on in the course. But for us right now to get an idea of what a component is just, we look at the component class first. So component is just a class decorated by a component decorator at the rate, which is prefixed with at the rate. So this decorator makes it an Angular component. So this component has three properties, basically more than three actually, but bare minimum it should have three properties. Let me refer to today's agenda just to make sure that I am not drifting someplace else. So it bare minimum it needs three properties. One is the selector. Selector means is a piece of a phrase or a piece of text that could be enclosed in a Angular brackets and use it as an HTML element. So this is not an actual HTML element. So if actually we have seen this yesterday in the index.html file. So this is where it is. It's treated. It's used as if it is an HTML element, but we all know that it's not an actual HTML element. It gets interpreted by the Angular system. So that is what selector is. And then there is a property called template URL, which refers to app.component.html file. So what does that mean? It means that when app-root is used in any place as an HTML element, replace it with HTML from this file. Okay, we'll come back to that, this file in a bit. And then there is something called style URLs, and which refer to app.component.css, because we choose the styling scheme to the CSS. CSS is generated. If we had chosen some other scheme, then that would have been generated over here called app.component. For example, less. So what's in CSS? It's empty because we are free to apply our own styles over here. So just to go over other properties too, although I haven't seen most people use it, but if let's say if there was not a lot of HTML to write, then we can just write that little bit of HTML over here itself. So that HTML will go in template, something called template, and not template URL. So let's say within the div we want to write this text. This is app component. So if the HTML was trivial enough to be able to, for us to be able to write within here itself, we could easily write here using the template property. So either template or template URL property is a must. If there was a lot of HTML, and even if there was not a lot, and many developers prefer to keep the HTML separate so that the designers could work on it regardless of how small it is. We could just go for template URL instead of just template. So I'll just switch back to template URL. And then there is something called style URLs. Similar to template URL, we can just have style here itself, or we can have URLs of style. So what is different between these two is I just talked about the similarity between these two. We can just have template and style, not have a URL or a separate file for that. Or we could choose inline style, or we could choose a separate file. The difference is template URL is single file, a scalar value, and you can see an array over here inside of the square brackets. That means we could give multiple referrals over here, multiple URLs. So we can have, comma, one more .css. So anyway, let's move on. Let's have a look at, we already looked at CSS, which is an empty file because it's not generating anything for us. But this is special case for app.component. Angular is creating some link or some HTML so that, or actually, I mean, instead of me explaining, let's actually have a look at it. So we have seen, we are going to see a CLI again. We have seen how to create a new app. And while doing that, the Angular, we noted that the Angular commands start with ng. So this is ng, small ng serve. Oops. So what this command means, angular.json. So what this serve means is defined over here. Let me hit enter and talk about serve because it will take a little while for it to build and get our application ready. So serve basically means, okay, build and make the application ready so that I can see it in action. So it says use this builder. So whenever we see at the rate, I mean in package.json or angular.json, it refers to the package that is already installed. So the package over here is Angular dev kit and build Angular using something called dev server. So we'll go over these in detail if time permits, but just to have a look and get a feel of how things are. So that is what serve means, and there will be other commands like build. So it's using the same package, but some options are different. So whatever options that one could give are kind of enumerated in this under this build command. So when we do ng build, oops, it's asking us something. So let's answer this and get back to this. So instead of ng serve, if we do ng build, it means build the application using these options. What are the options? Whatever it is building and generating out of that build, put that in a folder called dist/app1. We'll see that in action too later on, but these are the, and for index, where to put the index, where to consume the index from, or index file from, go to source folder and there should be an index .html over there and grab it from there. So basically this indirectly tells us we don't have to adhere to this folder structure. Whatever folder structure we want to choose, we just have to make sure that we give the right paths over here for the index.html, main.ts, and other options. So what are the assets that need to go? So we can even add more styles. So while the application is building, let's talk about a little bit about these styles, about the styles array. So, or this style array and the style that is specific to or that got generated under the name of app.component.css. So styles.css over here, because it resides in the source folder, parent of all the components, it's a parent style. So these styles are applied all over the site because it's referenced in index.html. Eventually it will be, right now it's not. I think the build process will take care of it. Because it is mentioned over here, I mean, I'm sorry. So because it is mentioned over here instead of in the index of .html, Angular build process will take care of this, of adding styles to the index.html. But this CSS file is very specific to the app component. So app.com, whatever styles are defined under this CSS file, they are not carried over to other components, to other HTML files or any other HTML. And there are ways to actually apply it to other components or globally, but they are not supposed to be. I mean, global styles or styles that are specific to sections should go under their respective folders. That is the best practice. That is the better practice. And let's say most of the time, I mean, the apps are designed so that the designers are working in parallel with the developers. So they try to work with as minimal files as possible. So if they are working, if they prefer to work with one style, one CSS file, then this is most likely they will be working on. And most of the time, the styles are applied as a theme. So most of the time, this components CSS file will be empty. And if you don't want to actually generate CSS file or test file, we have flags for that. We'll look at those flags in a bit, or we'll just mention about this in a bit. Right now, the application has compiled successfully. So let's open the application and have a look. So the last message, it says Angular Live Development Server is listening on localhost 4200, localhost on port 4200. Open your browser on HTTP, and it gives me an option of control click so that it can open that file. So our website is ready. I mean, we just scaffolded the website and our application is ready. So it's trying to open somehow. Even though my default is Chrome, it's opening Edge. So anyway, it opened, and it opened with some help over here, how to learn Angular, how to refer, how to go to the documentation, and anything else that it thinks that we should be learning. So where it is all coming from is by default scaffolding. I mean, earlier scaffolding from Angular didn't used to do it, but right now they introduced all this HTML in app.component, and it also says the content below is only a placeholder and can be replaced. Delete the template below to get started with your project. So it's asking us to delete right away. So I delete everything from that HTML and I just save, and you can see in the terminal that it has successfully compiled my change. And if I go to the browser, it's refreshed and it's all gone. So let's type some text over here saying that app works. So if I save again, it gets compiled and it gets live reloaded in the browser. So this is one of the advantage of these modern day frameworks. We don't have to refresh the browser just to have a look at our change. So quickly, let's get to let's get to creating more components. Yeah, even before that, let me just have refer to the agenda and then see if I'm not getting far from what I have planned earlier. Okay, so we talked about component and we'll go for creating components now. And we could have gone further using the same component itself, but let's have different components so that uh, we can take care of creating components first and get some practice on CLI. So any changes within any code changes, the live reloading is capable of detecting those changes and recompiling and refreshing the browser. But any changes to the folder structure and the file, the Angular CLI is not capable. So we'll have to stop, and to stop that is Control C is the command. So as you can see in the terminal, I have stopped the live reloading or recompiling or refresh and refreshing. And let's go ahead and try to create a component. So what was the command for Angular CLI? Ng. And what we want to do right now is generate a new component. Let's call a component as product component, because we saw the examples with JSON and all using the product. So let's generate, oh no. So we have to ask Angular or the command line interface to actually generate something that it understands. So ng generate component, and the name of the component should be product. And my habit is to use the dry flag right away, and I think that's a good habit so that we know exactly what gets generated. And where it gets generated. Sometimes we might forget the folder uh, of our actual intention to generate something. Anyway, dry flag will list out what it will exactly do, and we can decide if something needs to be changed. So it says end of the in a note, end of its run, saying that dry run flag means no changes, no actual changes were made, but this is what it will do. What it will do is it will create component.html. See how it added dot component to it, because we asked it to generate a component. So it will add that in the file product.component, product.component.html, product.component.spec. Let's say if you want to skip, it's too down. I don't know if you are able to see it just fine, and I hope so. If not, let me know the command that I'm typing, because they are way down in the bottom. Okay, before doing anything else, let me also show something cool. Ng generate, we don't have to type the entire generate word. G is shortcut for generate, and C is shortcut for component. And name, we cannot have a shortcut because it will not be able to interpret. Product -d, and which basically means the same command that I have typed earlier over here. Ng generate component named product, and with dry run. Don't do anything until I take that flag out. And I don't know the shortcut of this, but skip test. Let me go for skip test. Let's see if it knows if that is the right command. So basically that means don't create the test.spec.ts file for me. I'll take care of that later. But the good practice overall industry-wide is supposed to have the test file and actually write those tests. So, but there is an option to skip the test, and you can also skip the CSS or skip style. Because still, this is still dry run, no changes are made, so I have the flexibility of trying these options out. So anyway, there is a, I mean the name of the flag, I can't remember right now, but we can skip the test and skip styles if you don't want it, or we can even skip that HTML if you want the inline HTML templated inline rather than in a different file. But anyway, we'll just go for the product, and this time we'll still have the dry flag. This time we'll try to organize in the components into something called components. So let's see what it does. Basically, I mean, we can guess from the command itself that it will create another folder and put the component in that folder. But it did more than that. It did create a folder called components, and it did, oh no, that's what it did. But earlier, sorry, I forgot to mention, but what it was doing earlier even now is it created a folder called product and kept the product related, component related stuff in that folder. So that's good, it looks good, and let's move forward with that without the dry run flag. Now it actually will make the changes. So this is the component folder, components folder it created, and under that there is the product folder, and under that products folder we have the files that we just generated. So this is scaffolding of a component. So let's do ngserve because it will take some time to build, and meanwhile we'll go back to our product component and try to do some stuff over there. And not only it created the product component and related stuff, but it also updated app.module. Let's go and have a look at where it is and what kind of update it made. Oops. I keep forgetting that I should not be minimizing the chat window. Anyway, so we see a product component over here, and yeah, that's all. So any component, for them to be accessible in a module, right now we did not modularize our application. We are still using just the same module that Angular created for us called app module. So the ng generate command was intelligent enough, or by default it will put the module, the newly generated component in the root module, which is app module. But there are options that we can specify, asking the generation to add it to a different module. But right now we just have one module. We'll get into that later, inshallah. So by default, it added to this module. So every component will belong to a module, must belong to a module, and that is the reason it took care of that steps for us. Okay, let me go and try to refer. So how to get to the product module now, or sorry, product component. By default, app component is bootstrapped, but how to get to the product component? To get to the product component, we need to define something called routes. And how to define routes is we import a router module. Maybe go back to the agenda and see if something more important needs to be taken care of. So we'll come back to how to get to the product component in our app later on, maybe next session. But right now we'll try to take care of the structural directives. So we'll at this point of time we'll stick to the app component. Next session we'll see how to route to product component. So Let's open app component. So if you single click, you can see this is kind of italicized. That means it's temporary. If I click on something else, that will be gone. So double click will open it and keep it in the editor. So I have double click, or I could have just double clicked on the file tab itself. So anyway, in our component app component class, there is already a property called title. So this is how we declare properties. It's kind of a demonstration of a property too. It's a scalar value, which is just a string. We could have changed the string to something else, but right now let's keep it. And then let's define an array too. Okay. The thing that I copied from the JSON file, I did not paste it someplace, so I was worried if I had lost it, but they were in the clipboard, so I'm kind of lucky. Otherwise, I would have had to type all this again. Right now I have just pasted from the earlier JSON. Right now what it is saying over here is, I mean, whenever you see red squiggly under something, just hover your mouse over it and it will display what the problem is. So it's saying that class level properties need not have this var declaration that we use in JavaScript, or constant or let. So we can get rid of that. So right now in our component class, we have three properties. One is two are scalar, and one of them, the title, has a scalar primitive value of string, and the other one is a scalar value which is of type an object, and we have an array. So let's see how actually to display those properties in the template HTML of the component. So I'll just start typing some HTML over here. Let's say this is the heading. Let's say this is a div where we want to display the title. So there are different ways of displaying that. The simplest way is called string or just interpolation. Basically that means that interpolation goes in between double flower brackets. So okay, इंशाल्लाह कोशिश करूँगा थोड़ा बहुत हिंदी, कीप रिमाइंडिंग मी इंशाल्लाह. तो अभी यहाँ पे प्रॉपर्टी है कंपोनेंट में, कंपोनेंट के प्रॉपर्टीज HTML में जो कंपोनेंट का टेम्पलेट है, तो HTML और टेम्पलेट URL जो भी HTML है उसका रिलेटेड यहाँ पे अगर डिस्प्ले करना है तो वन ऑफ द वेज इज स्ट्रिंग इंटरपोलेशन. स्ट्रिंग इंटरपोलेशन में व्हाट इट मींस इज इट गोस अंडर डबल curly braces. So what is the different square flower brackets or curly braces? They mean the same thing, curly braces. So let's type in the title. We have the title. This is called IntelliSense, whatever we see underneath over here. So Visual Studio Code, and many IDEs, they have this kind of feature called IntelliSense. So IntelliSense हम लोगों को थोड़ा बहुत help कर देगा ये properties type करने में, या फिर anything कुछ भी जो उन्हें help कर सकता है इंशाल्लाह. So if we go to the browser, अब देखिए title display हो रहा है यहाँ पे. Title यहाँ पे सेट कहाँ पे सेट था, इसको मैं मिनिमाइज करके दो उसमें करता हूँ राइट अवे देखने के वास्ते. अभी के वास्ते ये बस हो जाना चाहिए title. So let's go and change the title to something like plain English instead of camel casing and all that stuff. So app 1, and normally the first letters in a title or a proper noun or caps. So as soon as I save, I should be able to see. So that's kind of what you say, one of the ways to display a value. So anything from component flows to the template. So one way. Let's say instead of displaying the title all the time, maybe let's give an option at this time, not to the user, but just have a property over here saying show title as false or true. Oops. So let me save and do something called ngIf. What happened? The app one, the title is gone. टाइटल नहीं है, क्यों कि हम लोग एक प्रॉपर्टी एक्सपोज करें जो फॉल्स थी और यहाँ पे एक कंडीशन डाल दी है कि अभी ट्रू करा मैं तो वापस आ गई. तो बेसिकली ng stands for again Angular, and the star in front of it indicates that it's Angular directive. So there is a directive called ngIf where we can pass a Boolean condition to it and act on that Boolean condition. So the Boolean condition right now and to the property to look at for that Boolean condition is show title. Show title is true now. Because of that, this div is getting displayed. So if we So if I mean right now I was trying to look at the source, but let's not go there. What happens is, I mean, the div will get generated inside the div. This text will get displayed. So that was scalar primitive value, not an object. So let's see how to display an object too. So I'm just copying the pasting the same over here so that I can make some changes. I have a product, and I'll get rid of this ngIf, and I have a property called product. We have a product one, sorry. So instead of product one, I'll just name it as product. And product का product name display करेंगे अभी वहाँ पे. Product dot, because it's an object, we have to do a dot and go for the property to display it. So div product name. Now the name is over here, right? So this is one way to display the values or bind the values from the component to the HTML, from the class, from the TypeScript class of the component to the template HTML. And let's quickly go for div. I hope I remember the structure and the syntax for ngFor. So there is another directive called ngFor which iterates over an array. So ngFor is supposed to be for an array. ngFor let product of products. So this is the temporary name given to me, given by me in place for each of the products. So go to the products array over here. Just click on this and collapse the product explorer so that we have more space. So we have products property which is an array. So I'm telling the ngFor directive go for this array, and for each of that array item name it as prod, and okay, I'll use the same syntax I'll use the same interpolation, double curly braces में display करेंगे prod के details, prod dot and save. यहाँ पे horizontal line दे दिए तो थोड़ा differentiate हो जाएगा. में क्या करें. So दो प्रोडक्ट्स है प्रोडक्ट्स एरे में, उसके ब्रांड लेनोवो और डेल था, तो NG फर यूज करके दोनों को डिस्प्ले कर दिया. तो बेसिकली एक डायरेक्टिव इट क्रिएट्स two lines because we are writing it in div. I guess I don't know why it is inside going to the new line, but I was expecting it to be in a single line. But anyway, so instead of just using string plain string interpolation and without any enclosing element, let's write a table quickly. So interpolation में ये हो रहा, कोई एलिमेंट यूज नहीं कर रहे, खाली एलिमेंट डेमोन्स्ट्रेट करने के वास्ते मैं एक HTML एलिमेंट में लिखने की कोशिश करो. tr h id भी डिस्प्ले कर देंगे फिलहाल. नेम नॉर्मली ये कैपिटल रहते हेडर्स, तो कैपिटल no, okay. GD अब curly braces same prod.id. So product name so anyway तो यहाँ पे प्रॉब्लम हो गया. इसमें ये हुआ कि हम लोग ईच प्रोडक्ट के वास्ते एक टेबल क्रिएट कर दिया हमारा. तो बेसिकली जस्ट आइडिया था मेरे को, लेकिन डेमो भी हो जाता बोल कैसा करा. तो वॉट एवर वी वांट रिपीटेड, जो भी रिपीट होना कराना चाह रहे वो NG फर के डायरेक्टिव के अंदर रहना, बाकी के पूरे आउटसाइड बाहर रहना. तो टेबल के हेडर बाहर आ गया और टेबल एक्चुअल टेबल का एंडिंग क्लोजिंग टैग भी डिव के बाहर है. तो अभी क्लोज कर दिया, अभी वो फिक्स हो गया. तो अभी एक टेबल लिखना चाहिए. वो एग्जैक्टली टेबल के सरका नहीं दिख रहा, थोड़ा बहुत अलाइनमेंट में फर्क है, लेकिन that demonstrates the idea. So this is not an HTML class or CSS class, styling class, so we'll just let it go for now. So this is how we use NG for. So the Angular has structural directives. Structural directives sirf NG for, NG if nahi hai, there is something called NG switch and there might be others, but these are the most used: NG for, NG switch and NG if. NG if to show or not show something, or I mean it doesn't have to be just show, it can be just hidden. No, I mean it can be generation or not, so it's to show or not show something. But this is remember while talking about single page application, we discussed about the methodology or strategies that we can have a single page application to show or not show. But this show or not show is within the component, within that HTML particular part, but that show was different. But single page application on these frameworks, the components get unloaded or loaded. So that is the difference. This is not the same show and hide of single page applications without these frameworks. So anyway, let's move on. It was pretty easy, right? NG if, NG for. And the seventh item over here I have is practice what we have learned over here. Generate components again and again, and try to display as many properties from here as possible into the HTML template, and generate new application, generate new components, use those commands until you can just say, okay, generate component means you should not even say generate component to another developer. You should say, instead of in English, you should say -gc -d So something like that. I mean, get comfortable with Angular. It is very very easy. Yesterday was all theory and boring. I know that, but sometimes without theory, uh, we will not be appreciating the easiness of the framework itself. But anyway, I mean, today whatever we learned should enable you to actually go to Visual Studio Code and actually carry out whatever you need to carry out, inshallah, whatever you learned today. So what is a class, what is a decorator, and things like that. So before I forget, let me send to everyone notes from yesterday, which I forgot. And if you have any questions, I don't know, I'll try to figure out a way and let with the organizers and let you know in the WhatsApp group how to ask questions meanwhile if you have any, inshallah. So this is from yesterday's notes, and today I'll just pass on what we did. If it will copy and paste just fine from OneNote, but anyway, oops. Let me just snip. Yeah. Okay. 96520 Okay. Whoever needs to add it to the group, send the message to this number. Inshallah, you will get added. Okay. I'll save this as day 2 and send it over. So again, try to practice and get comfortable with that. The more you are comfortable, the more you will enjoy and follow along, because your mind will not be asking your questions. Oh, what was the component? Or what was the command to generate the components? And then your mind will be thinking about that instead of focusing on what's going on right now, what's going on in the next class, or what's going on in the next session. So try to get comfortable and practice as much as you can, which should be a lot. And not only that, try to go for uh, something more than what we have learned. So for example, while creating components, we did not, I didn't remember those flags to skip the styles, to keep the text, to keep the HTML and keep the template in line. To keep that template in line, and try to figure that out, try to find that out, and then use those commands and try to get comfortable with those commands too. uh, and even if you don't know those commands later on, even if you forget, it's not a big deal. You can just generate delete those CSS and remove that CSS from those properties and keep them empty. But just get comfortable, get comfortable with the UI, get comfortable with the string interpolation, get comfortable with ng for, ng if, and try to go beyond what we have learned and have a look at ng switch and figure out how to implement that ng switch to. So inshallah, until next week, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And keep learning. Happy learning.